Broke BUSGIRL. Stella heard her mother say it before she saw her smile. The word cut across the warm dining room at Marin & Co., sharp enough to make a fork pause halfway to someone's mouth. Stella stood beside table 12 with a tray of empty plates balanced against her hip, wearing the plain black apron she had tied on 20 minutes earlier because one of her servers had called in sick. Vivian Marin lifted her wineglass and looked at her two friends like she had just delivered the funniest line of the night. "My daughter," she said louder now, 29 years old and still clearing tables. Stella's father laughed first. Richard leaned back in his chair, the gold watch on his wrist catching the candlelight. "Don't make that face, Stella. You chose this. Some people get careers, some people wipe crumbs." At the table, Stella's younger brother Evan stared down at his napkin. Across the room, her manager Lena stopped behind the counter. Stella tightened her hand around the tray, feeling the ceramic edges press into her palm. Every part of her wanted to say it right there. "This is my café. I built this room. You are eating at my table." But the dining room was full. Regulars were watching. 2 potential investors sat near the front window with menus open and folders tucked beside their chairs, so Stella swallowed the truth and lowered her voice. "Please don't insult the staff," she said, "or me." Vivian's smile thinned. "Oh, now she's professional." Richard looked around the cafe, not like a father visiting his daughter's workplace, but like a man inspecting something he wanted to price. His eyes moved from the packed tables to the exposed brick wall, then to the framed city award near the host's stand. "Who handles the lease here?" he asked casually. "Is the owner in tonight?" Stella went still. Vivian watched her too closely. Before Stella could answer, Mr. Alvarez, a regular from the next table, set down his fork and looked from Stella to her parents. "Wait," he said, "who runs this place?" The whole room went quiet. Stella did not answer Mr. Alvarez right away. She couldn't, because for one impossible second, she was 22 again, standing in her parents' kitchen with a folder full of café sketches, while Vivian flipped through them like they were children's drawings. "A coffee shop," her mother had said. "Stella, be serious." Richard had not even looked up from his phone. Hospitality is what people do before they figure out their lives. Now, 7 years later, Stella stood in the cafe those sketches had become, listening to the same voices laugh at the same dream. "I'll be right back," Stella said, placing the tray on the service station. She walked toward the narrow hallway beside the kitchen, past the espresso machine, past Lena's worried eyes, past the staff who pretended not to listen because they cared too much to stare. Vivian followed her. The moment they were behind the half-swinging door, Vivian's smile vanished. "Don't embarrass your father," she said. Stella turned. "Me, you called me a broke busgirl in front of a full dining room." Vivian adjusted the bracelet on her wrist, calm and polished. "Because you insist on acting like one." "I'm working because Mateo's sick and we're short tonight." "You always have an excuse." Vivian leaned closer, lowering her voice but sharpening every word. "Richard is embarrassed. We both are. You had potential, Stella. Then you started chasing this little cafe fantasy like it was a life." Stella looked through the small round window in the kitchen door. She could see Richard still at the table, smiling as if he owned the air around him. "I didn't ask you to come here and judge me," Stella said. "No," Vivian replied. "You just let things get bad enough that your father had to hear about it elsewhere." Stella's head snapped back. "Hear about what?" Vivian's eyes flicked toward the dining room. "The lease," she said. The word changed the temperature in the hallway. Stella had been negotiating the renewal for months, quietly, carefully, legally. Only a few people knew the timing and none of them were her parents. "Who told you anything about my lease?" Stella asked. Vivian folded her arms. "That is exactly your problem. You focus on tone instead of help." "Help is..." "Your father knows people. If you stop pretending you're above family, he can stabilize things before you humiliate yourself." Stella almost laughed, but nothing came out. There it was, the soft velvet cage, the same offer disguised as rescue, the same hand reaching toward her throat while calling itself support. "I'm not in trouble," Stella said. Vivian's mouth curved. "Then why are you carrying plates for tips?" For a moment, Stella almost said it. I own Marin and Co. I signed the lease. I approved the menu. I hired every person in that kitchen. But she saw exactly what would happen if she handed Vivian the truth too early. Her mother would blink once, recover, and find a way to make the café sound like a family achievement. Richard would step in with advice, contacts, conditions. They would not celebrate what Stella built. They would try to attach their names to it. So Stella stayed silent. Vivian took that silence as surrender. That's what I thought, she said. The kitchen door swung open. Lena stepped into the hallway holding a cream-colored envelope, her face drained of color. Stella, she said quietly, this was just hand-delivered to the host's stand. Stella looked down. Her name was typed across the front. In the upper corner was the logo of Richard's law firm. She ripped it open with both hands. The first line read, Notice of intent to challenge commercial lease renewal. Stella folded the letter once, then again, not because it made the words disappear, but because if she kept staring at them, Richard would know he had hit exactly where he aimed. Vivian watched her fingers. Well, Stella slid the envelope into the front pocket of her apron. I have tables to check. She pushed through the hallway door before her mother could follow. The dining room had changed. The warmth was still there, the low candles, the clink of silverware, the smell of roasted garlic and brown butter, but now every sound seemed careful. People had heard enough to know something was wrong. Richard noticed Stella first. He lifted his glass like he had been waiting for an audience. There she is, he said, still determined to do everything the hard way. Stella approached the table. Dad not here. Oh, here is perfect, Richard said, smiling at Vivian's friends. Family should be honest. Some people confuse stubbornness with independence. Evans shifted in his seat. Dad. Richard ignored him. He looked toward the rest of the café, letting his voice carry just enough. This place is charming. Risky, though. Businesses like this can look busy and still be bleeding underneath. Whoever owns it should be careful trusting inexperienced help. Stella felt Lena freeze near the host stand. Inexperienced help. He had said it cleanly. Not her name, not owner, just enough poison for anyone listening to wonder. Vivian dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. Stella has always had trouble accepting guidance. Mr. Alvarez turned in his chair. His wife put a hand lightly on his sleeve, but he did not look away. Stella kept her voice even. What do you know about this business? Richard gave a small laugh, enough to know the renewal window is not something to play with. The investor near the window lowered her menu. Stella's pulse struck once hard. Richard continued, landlords get nervous, cash flow gets questioned, long-term commitments require experience. Cash flow. Renewal window. Landlord hesitation. Those were not family guesses. Those were business terms pulled from a conversation Stella had not had with him. How do you know any of that? Stella asked. Richard's smile did not move. I listen when people are concerned. Who's? Vivian cut in too quickly. Don't take that tone. Your father is trying to help. Mr. Alvarez stood. His chair scraped softly against the floor, but in the tense dining room it sounded like a gavel. Richard, is it? He asked. Richard turned, irritated at being interrupted by someone he had dismissed as just another diner. Yes. Mr. Alvarez nodded toward Stella. Why are you talking about this café like Stella isn't the one who brought it back to life? Vivian gave a brittle laugh. That's very sweet, but Stella helps out. Customers get attached. They make stories bigger than they are. Mr. Alvarez's face hardened. I own the bakery 2 doors down. I watched her here at midnight hauling broken tile into a rented dumpster. I watched her paint that back wall herself. Richard set his glass down. Sentiment is admirable, he said, but running a business is not the same as being visible in one. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. He placed it on the white tablecloth with 2 fingers and slid it toward Stella. If you introduce me to the real owner, Richard said, I can make the lease problem disappear. No one spoke. Lena stopped seating the couple at the door. From the kitchen, the line cook stepped halfway into view, towel over one shoulder, eyes fixed on Stella. The room had divided itself without anyone moving. On one side, Richard sat polished and confident, pretending to offer rescue. On the other, Stella stood in a black apron with a legal letter in her pocket, and every person who knew the truth waiting for her to claim it. Before Stella could speak, the woman from the window table stood. She was one of the investors Stella had been hoping to impress that night, and in her hand was the expansion folder Stella had prepared herself. The woman looked at Richard, then at the business card on the table. "That's strange," she said. "Her name is on every ownership document we reviewed." Richard's face tightened. The investor's voice carried through the room. "So why are you pretending your daughter is just the help?" Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out right away. For the first time that night, his confidence had to catch up with the room. Vivian recovered faster. She pushed her chair back slightly and looked at Stella like Stella had personally arranged every pair of watching eyes. "This is absurd," Vivian said. "Are you really going to let strangers attack your parents in public?" Stella felt the old pull in those words. Your parents. Public. Embarrass. For years, that had been enough to make her apologize even when she had done nothing wrong. But now Lena stood by the host stand with customers waiting. The kitchen had gone quiet. The investor still held Stella's proposal folder, and in Stella's apron pocket was a letter that could threaten the lease, the staff, and everything she had built. This was no longer about being hurt. It was about protecting the café. The investor looked at Stella. Is this lease challenge real? Stella took a breath. A letter was just delivered. Richard immediately leaned forward, which is exactly why this conversation needs maturity, not theatrics. Lena's eyes narrowed. Without interrupting, she reached behind the host's stand, picked up the reservation tablet, and tapped the screen several times. Then she slipped it under the counter and turned toward the small camera above the pastry case. Stella saw it. Security footage. Lena was saving the night. Mr. Alvarez stepped away from his table. I'm calling Martin. Richard frowned. Who is Martin? The landlord, Mr. Alvarez said, already pulling his phone from his pocket. We're on the neighborhood business association together. Richard's expression changed by only a fraction, but Stella caught it. So did Vivian. Don't be dramatic, Vivian said, standing now. A family disagreement does not need half the town involved. Mr. Alvarez looked at her. Then maybe your husband shouldn't have involved the lease. He walked toward the hallway with the phone pressed to his ear. Stella stood still as the pieces began locking into place. Richard asking whether the owner was in tonight. Vivian mentioning the lease before Stella had said a word. The law firm envelope appearing during dinner. Richard using terms like renewal window, cash flow, and landlord hesitation. It had not been a cruel joke that went too far. It had been pressure, public pressure, the kind meant to make Stella feel cornered before she had time to think. Richard's voice cut through her thoughts. Stella, you need to be careful who you let influence you. These people do not understand what's at stake. Stella looked at him. I think they understand better than you hoped. Vivian stepped closer to Stella and lowered her voice. Stop this now. But Stella was already moving. She walked to the host's stand, past Lena, past the couple still waiting by the door, and stopped beneath the framed City Award Richard had been studying earlier. She lifted it from the wall. The frame opened from the back with a small metal latch. Inside, behind the visible award, was the original certificate Stella had kept there since the cafe's first year. She removed it carefully and returned to her parents' table. Richard watched the paper in her hand. Stella placed it flat on the white tablecloth, right beside his business card. The heading was visible to everyone close enough to read it. Small Business Revitalization Grant. Awarded to Stella Marin, founder Marin & Co. Vivian stared at it as if the words were written in a language she refused to understand. The investor stepped closer, silent. Lena crossed her arms. Evan finally lifted his head. I didn't know about the letter, he said. Vivian turned sharply. Evan. No, his voice cracked, but he kept going. Dad told me Stella was about to lose the place. He said tonight was supposed to make her listen before outsiders took advantage of her. Richard's jaw tightened. That is not what I said. It is, Evan said. You said if she felt embarrassed enough, she'd stop acting untouchable. The dining room seemed to inhale at once. Stella looked at her brother. His face had gone pale, but for once he did not look away. I thought you were helping, he said to her quietly. I swear I didn't know your firm sent anything. Richard stood. Enough. The word snapped across the room, but it did not have the effect it used to. No one moved for him. No one softened. Mr. Alvarez returned from the hallway with his phone still in his hand. Stella, he said, Martin wants to speak with you. Stella took the phone and stepped near the counter, turning slightly away to keep the landlord's voice private. She listened without interrupting. At first her face revealed nothing. Then her eyes shifted toward Richard. Vivian whispered, Richard. He did not answer her. Stella ended the call slowly. Richard lifted both hands, forcing a measured tone. Before anyone misunderstands. Stella held up the phone. Don't, she said. The landlord just told me who called him first. Stella kept the phone in her hand. For a moment no one in Marin & Co. moved. Not the customers, not the staff, not Vivian, whose hand was still curled around the back of her chair, not Richard, who stood beside the table like a man waiting for the floor to return beneath him. Stella looked at her father. You called Martin Hale 3 weeks ago, she said. Richard's face did not change, but his eyes did. You told him I was inexperienced, Stella continued. You told him I didn't have the financial backing for a long-term commercial lease. You suggested he delay the renewal until someone with stronger business oversight became involved. Vivian's lips parted. Richard. He snapped his head toward her. Don't. That single word told the room enough. Stella placed the phone on the table beside the certificate and the business card. 3 objects sat there now, lined up like evidence, his offer, her ownership, and the call that tied him to the threat. The café isn't failing, Stella said, her voice steady. The renewal was moving forward, slowly but forward. The only reason the landlord became hesitant was because my own father contacted him and made me sound unstable. Richard exhaled through his nose. I was protecting you from a bad decision. No, Stella said, you were creating the bad decision. The investor near the window stepped closer, her folder held against her chest. Stella, just so I understand clearly, you are the majority owner of Marin & Co. Yes. And the second location proposal we reviewed is yours. Yes. And Mr. Marin has no ownership stake here. Stella looked directly at Richard. None. The investor nodded once and turned her gaze to him. Richard reached for the polished version of himself again, the one that usually worked in conference rooms and charity dinners. My daughter has always been emotional about independence, he said. This is a family matter being misrepresented by people who don't know the full situation. Mr. Alvarez slid Richard's business card back across the table with 2 fingers. Looks pretty full from here. A few people looked down, not to hide agreement, but to hide their reaction. Vivian tried to laugh. It came out thin and cracked. Oh, please, are we really pretending Stella has been some great secret entrepreneur? She wears an apron. She clears plates. She didn't even tell her own family. Stella turned to her mother. I didn't tell you because every time I gave you something real, you looked for a way to make it smaller. Vivian's expression tightened. Stella continued, when I quit my job you called it a phase. When I worked double shifts you called me selfish. When I stopped asking for money you called me dramatic. And tonight when you walked into the café I built you called me a broke busgirl. A server near the bar looked away quickly, blinking. Evan pushed back from the table. I'm sorry, he said. Stella looked at him. His voice was quiet, but this time it did not disappear. I should have asked you. Dad told me you were about to lose everything and that he was trying to keep you from getting taken advantage of. I believed him because it was easier than questioning him. Richard's face hardened. Sit down, Evan. Evan did not sit. Vivian whispered, this family is being humiliated. No, Stella said, You humiliated me, in my own café, in front of my staff, in front of customers, in front of people deciding whether to invest in the next location, and you did it so Dad could walk in as the solution to a problem he helped create. Richard's jaw worked once. Then he said, you would have benefited from my involvement. There it is, Stella replied. The room seemed to understand the sentence before Richard did. Stella picked up his business card and held it between two fingers. You didn't want to rescue me. You wanted equity, decision-making power, your name attached to something you spent years mocking. Richard took one step forward, careful. Lena moved from behind the host's stand. No, Stella said softly, stopping her with a glance. Then she looked back at her father. You don't get to threaten me in here. She set the business card down. Then she untied the apron strings at her waist, folded the apron once and laid it over her arm. For the first time all night, she was not hiding behind work. She was standing in the center of the dining room as the person who owned it. You and Mom are no longer welcome at Marin & Co., Stella said. Not as guests, not as advisors, not as family representatives. Any future business conversation goes through my attorney. Vivian stared at her. You would throw your parents out. Stella's answer came without hesitation. Yes. The word landed cleanly. Lena stepped forward. I'll handle the tables nearby. Stella nodded. Comp dessert for anyone whose dinner was interrupted, and please let the front know we're pausing new seating for 10 minutes. She did not say it to perform kindness. She said it because the café still had to run, and every person watching could see the difference between authority and control. Richard slowly reached for his coat. This is a mistake, he said. No, Mr. Alvarez said from beside his table. The mistake was thinking nobody here knew who built this place. Vivian's friends stood awkwardly, gathering their purses without looking at Stella. One of them murmured, Vivian, maybe we should go. Vivian looked around for support and found only silence. At the door, Richard turned back once. His face had gone flat with contained anger. You have no idea what this will cost you. Stella held his stare. I know exactly what it already cost me. He had no answer to that. After they left, the room did not burst into applause. It was not that kind of moment. People returned slowly to their meals, speaking in lower voices, glancing at Stella with something quieter and stronger than pity. Respect. The investor waited until Stella came back to the window table. Does the lease interference affect tomorrow's meeting? Stella asked. The woman closed the folder, then opened it again. It affects what documents we need to review, she said. Not our interest. Actually, seeing how you handled this tells me more than a pitch deck could. Stella let out a breath she had been holding for half the night. The next morning, everything became formal. Stella sent the letter, the call details, Evan's messages, and Lena's saved security footage to her attorney. Martin Hale agreed to pause the lease challenge and continue renewal discussions only through Stella's legal counsel. Richard's use of his firm's letterhead in a personal pressure campaign triggered a complaint he could not laugh off at dinner. Among the local business owners, the story spread carefully, not as gossip, but as warning. Vivian tried twice to call Stella that week. Stella did not answer. Evan sent screenshots proving Richard had discussed the lease before dinner. His message underneath was simple. Use these if they help. I'm sorry I stayed quiet. She did use them. Not to punish loudly. To protect what was hers. 3 months later, Stella renewed the lease. 2 weeks after that, the second location agreement was signed after extra legal review. Lena became general manager of the original café, and on her first official morning, Stella tied on the same black apron her parents had mocked. Lena raised an eyebrow. You know you don't have to do that anymore. Stella smiled and picked up a tray. I know. And that was the difference. She still worked the floor sometimes. She refilled coffee. She wiped tables. She carried plates when the rush hit harder than expected. But the apron no longer felt like something anyone could use to shrink her. It felt like proof that she had never been above the work and never beneath the people who did it. Months later, a framed photo hung near the entrance of Marin & Co. It showed Stella and her staff on opening night. sleeves rolled up, hair messy, eyes tired, all of them smiling like they had survived something together. Beneath it was a small brass plaque. Founded by Stella Marin. One evening, a new customer paused near the host's stand and looked around the packed café. "This place is beautiful," she said. "Who runs it?" Lena glanced toward Stella, who was laughing with the pastry chef behind the counter. Then Lena answered without hesitation. "She does." Stella did not need her parents to finally see her worth. She only needed them to stop standing in front of it.